All right, hello and welcome campers to another edition of Low Code Campfire for Friday, June 10. This is episode number 54. And we hope to, we will be continuing the discussion a little bit with Pixel Perfect Design, plus any other topics that you want to get into today. I am Dale Warner. I'm the head of support for Plantain App and your host for today. This is an event we do every Friday, 10 a.m. Central Time, and it's just a gathering to talk about low code in general, Plantain App in specific, and we often share techniques and challenges and draw on the community for help and advancement. These are all recorded, and so they're out on our YouTube channel, plantainapp.com/YouTube. You can get there by that QR code if you like, but we encourage you to subscribe and get the alerts for when we post new content. We run this with a pretty generic agenda where we introduce ourselves and say hi. We start with first call, just anything that's hot and burning and we want to get to right away. Other than that, we take a look at the things that are on our community Campfire website, the community feature requests, any topics that you submit, and anything else you want to talk about. After a while, after an hour or so, we will stop the recording and go into our Afterglow segment, and that's just more of a social time, but you're welcome to join us and stick around for that. We have very few guidelines. Try and keep the noise down. If you've got, use mute if you've got noise behind you. You can submit questions and topics in advance with this QR code or the link that's in our emails. And with that, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
I see Aaron.
Good morning.
Good morning. I see Aaron is with us.
Good morning.
All right. Special guest star. So we'll go right to first call. What's on your mind? Anything that we need to get to right up front?
I have a question, if
Please.
I may. Is it possible, or is there, I don't know if it's a listing limitation or a bootstrap limitation, to call a listing as a pop-up from within a listing that's a pop-up?
So, whoops, I'm gonna, wrong screen. I think we saw a question about that recently, even on the community portal. That's
Yeah, that was my question.
so I know I recall that the developers kind of roll their eyes a little bit when we get pop-up within pop-up within pop-up. I don't know the technical limitation and haven't tried that one. I assume you've tried it and it doesn't work the way you want it to.
Well, the second pop-up, just nothing happens. It doesn't appear. So I'm able to open up a listing as a modal form, but within that modal form, I need to drill down a little further to another section that has more than one entry. So logically, a listing would be the way to display it. But when I try to open another listing within another modal form, it just ignores me.
Yep. So the answer is I don't know the limitation. And
I haven't tried that, but I'm wondering if you if the detail view, item detail view would work for you or not.
Honestly, I'm doing that right now as I'm going to be using the detail view. I'm building a Razor token right now that is going to supply that information, but it's a lot to, I believe, it could potentially be a lot to display. I don't know. And I'm not sure if that's the best way of doing it, because it's kind of like, think of it like our forums where you may have a lot of replies and comments.
Yeah.
So it could potentially get really, really, really long when someone clicks on it and it opens up this huge thing. I'm not sure if that's the best way of doing it, but that's the only way I could think of doing it at the moment.
And we have, of course, I think it would be the same experience, though. I suspect we have the detail view in pop-up option, but I'm pretty sure they'll probably do the same thing that you're experiencing. This is, and I'm talking about the BS5 grid. Are we talking about a Bootstrap 5 listing data table? No.
No, Bootstrap 5
Okay.
isn't available for me to be able to use just yet.
Okay. So definitely if it's in line, then that's the only option. Because I also in the new data table view, we have the sidebar options as well. But
So I found your question on the forum, and I think that at this point, the best I can promise is to take it to our product team and ask the question: Is this viable? And like I say, my recollection of comment of discussions prior is that pop-ups within pop-ups are an issue. And I mean, if we solve that one, if we decide to go there, it's on. I'm just wondering: do we support one more level? Do we try and support n levels of pop-up? How far should we go? You want one more level, I know.
I would need at least one more. I mean, I can do a form pop-up within a listing pop-up. That works. So you can get 2 levels, but they're of different modules.
Mm-hmm.
It appears that if you try to do a second pop-up of the same type of module, that's where it just doesn't. So I'm not sure if it's maybe, I mean, again, just as a programmer here and taking a guess in the dark, is that the pop-ups themselves maybe have an ID that is not unique. So when it tries to open another pop-up with the same ID, it just gets ignored. So, listings may have one ID, forms may have another. So you can only have one form pop-up and maybe one listing pop-up. You can't have 2 of the same module types.
I'm not real familiar with how it's put together, but I'll ask the question. So we'll get a definitive answer as to whether it can be done and what the product team wants to do. And I was going to go with the same direction that Patrick suggested, using the detail view, but it's not what you want to go.
Well, I appreciate any help,
Okay.
any info.
Anyone else with a first thing we want to get to? Not, I would like to move on and talk about pixel perfect design, and especially since we have Aaron with us again today. So for any of you that I don't know if you saw the Low Code Cafe, but we talked about pixel perfect design. That webinar I thought was pretty informative. It's out there on the YouTube if you happen to have missed it. But that was in webinar format. Now we're in meeting format, and you can directly interrogate Aaron and make him tell you his secrets. So any follow-up questions or comments on that webinar?
It just takes us a while to find the unmute button, Aaron. Don't take that personally. So
I was just thinking I must have had a perfect presentation.
So I am CSS challenged. So you tie in the Tailwind CSS to your pages and stuff, but you only have to use 1 or 2 of the attributes. You don't have to implement their entire CSS library, right, and overwrite everything. Is that an accurate way to ask the question?
Sorry, with Tailwind, I don't have to overwrite like the Bootstrap library, or what do you
Right.
mean exactly?
Well, like, I mean, you were creating different classes and applying them,
Mhm.
but I can, if I want to use Tailwind and create one class, I only have to use that one class. I don't need to use a base set of classes or something that they have implemented in the rest of their Tailwind. If I want, is that the right way to think of that tool for being added into them?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. Basically, Tailwind is it's a whole sort of new. I mean, it's actually not that new, but it's actually only maybe 5 years old. But the paradigm of utility classes is relatively new. So back in the day, or I mean, even today, we still kind of created something called, like, let's say, div class header, and then you put all that style on that header tag to say, you know, this is a flex element. It has a background of white. It has a shadow. It has padding. You know, the text color is this. You do all that stuff on this one class called header. Tailwind kind of flips it around where it says actually what you do is you have a header tag, so like an HTML header tag, and then you apply the classes that you need. So you apply, you know, individually you apply, you say this is a flex element, and it's a, you know, it has a padding of 5, and it has BG of white. So you add classes, and your classes can grow on an element. So it could literally have 20 classes on an element. That's not uncommon. But Tailwind is really powerful in that if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to go that route, you could actually just kind of revert to the original way of doing things, which is instead of just applying all those classes, you could extract them and then just make a component out of them. So a really good example of that would be, let's say that you have a button class, and you don't want to put, you know, BG primary, text white, grounded, XL, shadow, XL. You don't want to add all those classes every time you have a button. So you could create a button class, let's say it's BTN, and then you extract those classes and you put it into the Tailwind build, and then suddenly you have a component that you can use. So you can actually have both. It depends on the setup. I find that 95% of what I'm doing is just applying classes to the tags directly. And then that last 5% is extracting components that I reuse a lot and I don't want to have a lot of classes, like buttons, for example. And then also it's extracting those classes is also used for targeting classes where you can't modify the markup, where you can't change the classes. So yeah, it's a really, really flexible framework because you can really morph it to whatever you want it to be. It can be complementary to the framework that you're using. In this case, maybe it's Bootstrap 5 or 3 or 4, but it could also stand alone. So it depends on sort of depends on the project, depends on what you're doing. I hope that's sort of what you're asking. I'm not sure if I covered that.
No, it is. It's the concept of utility classes that's new to me, and
Right.
I mean, your button example is a good one, and that's more how I would want to use it, is to, you know, make all my buttons look the same and just very easily without. It seems like if you were adding utility classes to every element, it'd be easy to miss one, and maybe I'm still thinking of it wrong. But I'd want to go build a button class and I'd just apply one class of button to it.
Yeah, for sure. But buttons are a great example. I use that sort of in other places too sometimes. But in the kinds of, it really depends too on the design, because the types of designs that I create they're both extremely specific and they have a lot of variation, and sometimes those variations are so minor. So a good example would be like cards, for example. Cards are, you know, Bootstrap has cards, of course, and it's such a common component that's used across a website in a variety of ways. Sometimes cards are big, sometimes they're small, sometimes they have headings, sometimes they don't, they have images or they don't. They can vary so much that to kind of create a single class and then try to make a bunch of modifiers of that, it sort of restricts your HTML to be a certain way. Whereas if you sort of take the utility first approach and you just build a card style that you need, you can take that and then you can just remove the utility classes that you don't need and put in the ones that you do need. And then it can just work with that whatever markup that you need it to have. So there's a lot of power in that. So it's funny because as I work on these kinds of projects, more and more I would think, oh, it'd be nice just to have a single class, you know, so I don't have to repeat this markup. But then I find that actually this component does warrant just the variation that you can get from having utility classes attached to it. And, you know, a lot of time too, I think pretty much all the time we're dealing in templates. And so when we have a template and we're just looping through items, it means that we don't have to apply classes actually too many times because it's just being looped. Yeah, it's one of these things where if you try it, like you have to try it to really get the light bulb moment, because it sounds very antithetical to the way that we've always built websites and software, but once you start using it, it just really clicks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's
Jim,
the coexistence of Tailwind and Bootstrap and how they integrate is something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. One thing that might be helpful would be if you could show how you build DNN themes and how you integrate in the Bootstrap, which Plant and App needs, and the CSS that you've generated with the Tailwind class. You know, what does a theme look like when you've done it this way?
Yeah, for sure. Let me just think. Is there a way that I could share my screen, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me just pull up VS Code for you.
And while you're doing that, I just want to comment, Jim, I really would like to get that lightsaber background noise for me. I think that's really a good one. No, I'm sorry. You sounded like you had a lightsaber going on behind you, at least from my side. So it was really quite cool.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share this screen here.
Is that any better? Has that worked?
I don't think so.
Still the same.
So, sorry, let me get this. So this is not the best example because this one actually doesn't have it prefixed, but I'll explain that in a second. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this full screen. So this is, I'll show you the website itself so you can sort of see what the end product is. So this is a website I launched a few months ago. Very specific design, very custom. Everything is just, you know, it has to be perfect to the designer's vision and the customer's vision, quite frankly. So you can kind of see the level of detail that goes into it. Request a quote. This is actually an action form. Oh, there it is. So yeah, this is an action form with some custom styling. So notice that this form is actually, it's very irregular. there's these sections called like client details, which is this left-hand sidebar thing, and there's these divider lines. And then project details has that too, and this upload has that. So what a Tailwind project looks like is it's actually not too different from just a typical DNN theme. So can you see like my sidebar here easily enough?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I actually so in my CSS folder, I have an input file called Tailwind CSS, and this is sort of the one of the requirements of Tailwind. You basically have this you have Tailwind running, and then it looks in this file, and then it sends it to an output file. So don't get confused here, because this is called Tailwind CSS. This is the input file, and over here in my public build folder, I also have a Tailwind CSS file, which is the output file. So when I start the project, hold on a second, sorry. So I'm just gonna start up a terminal. So it's watching the input file for changes, and then it's going to output the updates. So if I go into Tailwind CSS and I put, let's say, you know, like I could create my own kind of card component, let's say. So I could go apply, you know, and then it's going to be a shadow MD, and it's going to be a padding 10, let's say, and you know, BG white. So I could create a card like that. So that's where I would be doing, like, you know, maybe you create a button. And so I actually have another, you'll see I've got an import button CSS, and that's where I create buttons. So I'm creating those button components. And so one thing you might recognize is that I actually have an action form CSS file. So this is getting imported into that main Tailwind CSS file right here. So action form, I actually, because I don't think I can change like the class C-form. So what I'm doing is I'm just creating CSS inside my build. So I'm not actually applying classes directly to, you know, a template or a component or anything like that. I'm just creating the CSS directly inside my package, my build. And I'm just applying a padding left of 239 pixels, but only when you're on a extra large screen size. So that's why that XL means like the extra large screen size, PL is padding left. And then these square brackets with the 239 pixels, that means arbitrary value of 239 pixels. So what happens is that it reads this, and then it outputs into my Tailwind, let's see if I can find it, 239 pixels. So you see it creates this media query of min width 1280, which is extra large screen size, and then I'm going to put a padding left on the C-form class of 239 pixels. So ultimately Tailwind, it's just CSS. There is a lot of fancy things in the engine, but what it outputs is just CSS. That's it. It's no different than, you know, ultimately, in a sense, it's no different than just writing CSS by hand or using Sass or something like that. But it's just a lot more automated. It's a lot faster and cleaner. So where was I going to show? What was I going to show you here? Oh yeah, I was just going to say my output here is called Tailwind CSS, but I could have called this skin.css. So I hope that kind of clarifies, like in this particular site, this is kind of essentially the skin.css file. I just call it this way because this is just my own particular way of doing this. But yeah, so it's ultimately it's just a CSS file. Now, I mentioned in the call what you could do theoretically. So let me just go back to the top. one thing you want to do, you have to be careful of, is having conflicts in your CSS files. So if you have, let's say, a Tailwind file, Tailwind is going to do a lot of scaffolding where it puts up like resets and everything. So you can see here what it does is it has a bunch of kind of opinionated resets on your project, which is normal because it's resetting the browser, it's resetting the sizes of everything. It's kind of setting a plain kind of starting point so that when you go and you add your classes, it looks good and everything looks consistent. You can actually turn this off by disabling pre-flight. And the reason why you'd want to do that is because let's say that you had Tailwind, but you also had Bootstrap loading. So if they both have scaffolding, they're going to conflict and you're going to have like style problems on the site because some classes and just some elements are going to have styles overriding each other. So what you do is you do two things. You disable the pre-flight, which removes all of this normalized stuff. And then you also prefix the classes so that instead of being, let's see if I open up one of these things, if I open up index, I'm going to open up default. So you can see actually a good example here. This is really, really simple. But instead of having, relative for position relative, it would be like TW dash relative. And so you wouldn't have a conflict between like Bootstrap's P5 class and Tailwind's P5 class. So in a sense, when you disable pre-flight and you prefix it, you're kind of making Tailwind, I don't want to say a passenger to Bootstrap, but it's complementary. So suddenly you can use Tailwind and all of its power to create your very custom layouts and your components, but it's not going to be in conflict with Bootstrap, and it actually allows Bootstrap to do all the normalized stuff. So Bootstrap can just do its normalize and all that, and then you just introduce Tailwind to kind of fill in the areas that you want to fill in. So if you want to do it for like layouts and custom navigations and other things like that. Does that sort of clarify?
Yeah, that's been very helpful. Has the lightsaber gone?
It is.
I think so. Yeah.
Good. So I think I'd misunderstood. So in this example, you're not using Bootstrap at all. The action form is set to expect Bootstrap to be there, but in fact, you're not loading Bootstrap at all. You've just provided all the you've provided all the classes that the action form expects, but defined with the same names using Tailwind.
That's correct. Yeah, and it actually varies. It varies by project. It depends on the project needs. Sometimes a project needs a lot of Bootstrap and it needs all those components. And so I wouldn't want to try to replace that because it would just be a lot of work. Whereas it would, so I would make Tailwind complementary to it. In this particular case for this site, there's only 3 forms on the site, I think. And the designs are pretty rigid. They stay very simple. And so, I opted to just remove Bootstrap completely and then just use Tailwind to kind of fill in the blanks for it. So in my case with these things, I actually have a few classes, I think, on like action form where I've got the padding, obviously. I've created this class called divider line, or I don't know if that was a creation of mine or if that's just one of the classes. And then I have like the section title, which I think is a title field in action form, where I actually offset it from the rest of the form. So this is an example where it's like I just kind of apply my own styles to fill in for Bootstrap. But yeah, in other cases, maybe you have Bootstrap loading, and then you have Tailwind as a separate sort of complementary style sheet to do the heavy lifting of like the layouts and whatnot.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
your project In your project, I noticed that you had a bs5.css. How is that being used?
Let me remember. BS5. You know, I think this actually might be an older holdover from something else. So in this case, I don't think, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I think this is actually somewhat wrong. But anyways, this is an example of where, let's say that I had a Bootstrap site that had Tailwind complementary, but I want to style the modals differently. So this is like a lot of CSS that I kind of write in to override modal styles, so I can get like really, really nice modals. I'm trying to think if I have a good example of that. But because I personally don't really love the Bootstrap modal style, so I like to kind of go in and make some tweaks. And a lot of time it's actually not that challenging. It's just, yeah, it's not a lot of work to override that. Let me see if I can find you an example of that. Actually, I'm going to try to do a 2-for-1 in that. Here's a project where this design was provided and it's extremely custom. This doesn't have any, this is just using a different module called 2SXC. If anyone's familiar, it's a structured content module in DNN. But this is an extremely custom design, so this is prime for Tailwind. But when you, like, this is actually a Bootstrap modal loading. So I kind of go in and I kind of override some of the classes. It's actually sometimes a combination where I both apply classes to the templates, but then I also sort of override them in other places if I don't have access to those classes. But yeah, that allows that kind of fine-tuned control over, you know, changing the Bootstrap style.
On this form, I'm really impressed with the way that you were able to style the file upload. I know that annoys, let's see, or was this one? Yeah, one of these.
Yeah, so interesting story about this one. So I think, yeah, in the presentation I did on Wednesday, I also had a similar kind of thing, but Tailwind is so powerful. They actually just released something that kind of made something I said on Wednesday irrelevant. So I mentioned post CSS import, and post CSS import, what that does is it takes, it makes it so that it doesn't just do a CSS import of these, it actually creates one single CSS file by combining all these files. But actually with the new Tailwind CLI, that's irrelevant. You can still do this without having to install, you don't have a nodes module folder. You can just use the CLI and it just handles everything. So it's even more automated. But in this particular case, I think I just used some style overrides. Like I didn't even modify the template, I don't believe. So one really cool thing I wanted to show you, Tailwind is just, it's so powerful and it can do so many things that would really surprise most people. So if I go to the docs here, there's actually, oh no, is there this thing? There's a way to style file inputs by classes. So it's sort of clever enough that, like, because I don't know if anyone's ever tried, but like styling file inputs is like one of the hardest things because browsers just treat it so differently. But they actually provide utility classes that targets the structure of how that works across all browsers. So you can create these file inputs that look really, really nice just by using a handful of classes. And it's got other features that are kind of shocking, to be honest with you. Like sometimes it's like, wow, I didn't know CSS could do that, or I didn't know that they could figure out a way to make that work. But they do. You can kind of see. A side note, if anyone's been wondering, well, how do you remember all of these classes? And it's a combination of one, knowing CSS pretty well, but they in VS, which I assume probably most people here use, there's actually an extension for Tailwind IntelliSense, so that it knows the build. So like I have a Tailwind config here, and I imbue it with all my, like it uses a default set of classes, but then you can also modify what classes do. And you can even change their names and stuff if you wanted to. So like it knows when I start typing shadow, it will tell me all of my options for shadow. Or if I type in, let's say I've got a text color. So it's a text, well, there's all these sizes, but let's say that I want, any of the grays that I have, or, there's a lot of grays and stuff in the new builds, but it's got all the colors in the build. And it even has my own colors that are like, my text primary or my primary lighter or, all that kind of stuff. So it's very easy to remember. I also have Prettier, if anyone's familiar with that one. Prettier automatically formats the classes, and Tailwind has an integration with Prettier so that it sorts it automatically. So because it's mobile first, let's say that I try to say, this is a BG purple 500, but actually on the extra large screen, it's going to be red 500. It should sort it automatically. So you see when I saved it, actually, it put the XL at the end because it knows that this CSS comes later down the road. So there's lots of pretty amazing things. And this is this is some pretty modern tooling. These are some sharp knives, as they say. And you kind of need that when you're doing like very exact UI work and user interface development. So yeah.
So I think you touched on a little bit about how to install this, but I'm just wondering, what are the first steps if somebody, is there a tutorial? What's the first steps if somebody wants to dig in to Tailwind?
Yeah, I mean, their documentation is amazing. They cover everything, but on top of that, they have a YouTube channel which they release regular videos, and they show you installation steps. They show you how to do different things. They show you kind of common things. So I would definitely check out, obviously, the documentation. The installation is so easy and so quick and, simple to follow. They've got the different options. So you could even do like the play CDN. So you could try that. If anyone wanted to play around with it, they have this great website. Where is it? Called play.tailwindcss.com, and you can actually just go ahead and just play around in it, and you can just try it out and see what it's like before you even install it. And so you'll have like this editor here on the side, and it will just update as you make changes. So if I were to clear this out completely, for example, it'll just clear it out. You can even try changing your config file, or play around with creating your own components. So I go at layer, and then I go components, and then I can create like a button class. And in my button class, I'm going to say BG is blue, 800, let's say, or that's too dark, but BG blue 600, and then like let's say hover BG blue 500. So now if I were to go in and create like, a button class, a button. This is my button. I should have it in the sidebar. You see when it hovers, it goes. So if I were to try to like customize this component, it would be like padding 5, rounded, shadow. Let's say it's a flex, item center, justify center. It's actually probably an inline flex, I would imagine. So I'm just going to change that. There we go. Probably need like text white. Let's say font bold. So there's my component. built out. But realistically, that's like a, you know, that's when you're building components, that's 5% of the time. Realistically, you'd be actually doing stuff like this. You go, I want a grid and I want it to be on a large screen. I want it to have 2 columns and there's a gap of 10. And let's say, you know, this is my second column. And let's wrap this first one into column 2. So actually, let's say that it's a small screen. I want it to be grid calls 2. There we go. You can kind of see how quick that is to kind of create, to rapidly scaffold things. Yeah.
Cool, that's a great start. Just to mention, I put on the chat the Play Tailwind and the Tailwind docs that you can jump to. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, but yeah, check out their YouTube channel as well. It's amazing. It's just really good. There's also a Discord server that people use. So if you ever have questions, people are really quite good at answering. Again, like I mentioned, it's not really for the faint of heart. Like you have to be somewhat comfortable with CSS. You have to be comfortable with build tools like this. Having a bit of JavaScript obviously helps. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's just CSS. So like having a good sort of foundation in HTML and CSS and knowing how to create your layouts like is really the, you know, the starting point. But paradoxically, it actually makes you a better developer when you start to use it, a better front-end developer, because it just makes things easier, it makes things faster, and it almost teaches you how to do things. So it's really kind of nice.
Great. Anyone else that would like to get a question in for Aaron before we move on? Good. Well, Aaron, thanks for showing us some more about that.
No worries. My pleasure.
Cool. What else do we have going on? I don't know that there was any particular questions to the group this week, other than the one that Ben has posed. I took a look at the Campfire website earlier, and it hasn't changed since last week, but I'll mention if there's anybody new that's on the call that the Campfire website is a place where we put contributions, areas where we've solved issues with any, whether big or small, with development. And so you can search through this and find a particular solution. You can go and see it in action because the author has put it onto the site. And if you gain access to the site, which you can do by attending this meeting and shooting me your email address and asking for access, but you'll have full access to open it up and take a look at how a particular thing was built or done. So I'll just remind you that it's out there, and I know that I use this pretty regularly when I'm looking for something. So being familiar with work that other people have done and contributed is useful. Cool. Yep. So if anybody needs access to that, feel free to just shoot me a message privately on the chat. Other than that, I took a look at feature requests earlier today, and really I need to do some work in there. I know that there are some things that are on our list that are like, they've moved from feature request to actually on our list to develop for you. Not that they're, so they're, let's say they're approved, but in the stack. And so I need to do a little bit more work in there to do that. And I will try to have that done by next week so we can look a little bit deeper at feature requests. But I will remind you that from time to time, we just in this meeting go over feature requests and give you a chance to lobby for things that you'd like to see, because there's a voting capability in there, and we try to look at the things that have got a lot of energy behind them to put at the front of our development. Yeah, sometimes we tell ghost stories. I don't know if anybody has encountered anything that qualifies, but this is sometimes you beat your head against the wall a little bit trying to chase something in a project. And so I wonder if anybody, and we tell the stories because when it's one of those that it's been difficult, at least we share the knowledge and then maybe save somebody else from beating their head against the wall. So anyone with a ghost story this week?
Does it have to be long dead to be a ghost story?
No.
I just had a support ticket closed that seemed to be a problem I had with an install that left an orphaned directory behind, but it wouldn't let me edit any action forms. And Mihai quickly figured it out, but I didn't realize that there were install like a no CSS folder that got left behind.
Oh, was that the answer to your one from this morning we were talking about?
Yeah. So and that cleared it right up. So I'm just waiting for a reply to make sure that I'm okay to move forward with other hot fixes. But it wasn't as scary as I was worried about when suddenly nothing could be edited. So.
Yep. Yes, this no CSS has happened before, and apparently the symptom that you reported in your ticket, Jim, didn't trigger me to say, oh yeah, that's the no CSS problem. But so sometimes I think they present a little bit differently. But yeah, I was looking at that ticket and talking about it with Mihai and trying to figure out what the right solution was, and it didn't occur to either of us at the time. I'm glad he persevered and found that answer. I was going to try and bring that up here. Right, so this is the one: desktop modules, DNN Sharp, action form, templates, form, no CSS. Just the presence of this folder will prevent you from getting into the admin screen. So that's the one you were talking about, right? You just deleted it and things were better.
Correct. And that was his suggestion after some details. And I had tried rebooting the server and all kinds of things, and just trying to get in there. And then he had mentioned that app. I don't know if it was in the forms log, in the action forms log, it actually talked about an install problem. It was trying to load an action form installer of some type, or the message about
run a script.
Run a script.
Yep. Good. Well, I'm glad he found that answer, and that helps me remember to try. When I see that again, I need to trigger a little bit faster on.
Well, and it's the scary part was it was coming up as a server. At least the message coming up on the screen was a server error type message, and nothing that seemed like it would be action form related.
Yep. So good. That's a good one, Jim. Thanks. Anyone else before I move on? I wanted to challenge this group a little bit to think about, to think about a little bit about things that are on our community website, things that we know that we areas where we want to improve, and it occurs to me that you guys would probably have some good opinions about what needs to be part of that. And so far, I'm thinking in two particular areas. We've talked before about having a marketplace, a place where you could build full solutions or partial solutions that could be sold or resold or used by others, or even just directly consumed by others. And we're inching towards that place behind the scenes, getting to the spot where things can be exported and imported easily between environments. So as we get there, I'm just wondering what kind of characteristics the marketplace would have that would make it make sense to you. And so if you think about that a little bit, that I'll leave some time to talk about it next week, what the characteristics should be. And as always, I welcome if you want to send them to me either on that comments, or you can email me directly. And the same thing down the line, we want to get to some form of a job board, the ability to, and we hope that the low-code developer community increases, and that there's a place for them, for people who are seeking employment, to be able to be listed and available for people to hire. And in the same way, I think there's probably other things that we could do with that, like whether it's a job posting or project kind of work. I know that comes up from time to time. And somebody says, hey, I have this thing, I don't want to do it, I want somebody else to do it. So just again, challenge you to think a little bit about what's a job board might look like, so that when we begin that development, that we have a good set of ideas, requirements that we can build into it. So that's two things. And really, if there's other suggestions on how we can improve community, community.plananapp.com, we'd love to hear those as well. And as always, I just want to thank you guys so much for when, sometimes when I get into a community post and there's already been one or two or three really great answers, and hey, what about that I think it's great that you guys help each other as much as you do. So thank you for that. What else do we need to cover today? We still have 8 minutes that we can, in our normal segment, or we can adjourn early.
Well, I have two remaining questions.
Sir, please.
So one is, what's Ben's t-shirt of the day?
Yep.
And the other one is on the Campfire Contributions. To implement one of those contributions, should I just be able to export that and then bring it back into my site to try to, is that the best way to try to implement or use one of those?
Well, so typically each one, there's been some amount of thought into how you would reuse it. So in some cases, it's just you have to see what the technique is and then do it in your site. I know Ben has been really good about click here to copy and paste, and so each one is different because it's really up to the author to figure out. But there should be instructions on them. If you have one in mind, we could take a look at it, or
well, only because I was having this problem getting into forums. I remember that Anthony Cadden, I think, posted one for being able to get to forms editing and everything from anywhere. And I went, oh, that's really cool. How do I do that? The module access manager. That.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped to the wrong spot. That was comments. I wanted go. So this looks to me like you would probably develop the same listing that So it looks to me like this one, at least as it is at the moment, it shows you all of the different things that are on the site that you can search for them and find them. I don't think we have a jump into editing kind of a button added yet. So there's some, it looks like there's some work to be done here if you want to actually start editing from here.
Are you logged in as a admin at the moment?
Bless you. Yeah, so there we go. So edit form, edit module, notes. So if we wanted to edit the filter list as it just opens and goes. So my guess then is that that particular listing, you could export this and recreate it on your site in a private spot. And
right, I just, you know, some of them I have, you know, started copying and looking at and stuff, and then manually recreating them, going, oh, this one's got several forms and stuff, and maybe there was a easy export button to gather it up, which I know is what the marketplace concept brings to us.
Yep.
But you know, just before I started, oh, let me go look at that screen and cut and paste and everything, just making sure there wasn't a straightforward export import type place that I'm just missing.
Yeah, there, and you know, just as a reminder, this was this is kind of a stopgap before the marketplace where we just where we share the techniques, and there's no yeah, it's no formal structure, so each one may be different. And as you point out, some of them are far more complex and it's not just, you know, click and go. So sorry about that, but at least it shows the hows or the SQL behind, things like that. So,
okay.
And yeah, not to skip past the first part of your question. Then do you have something you'd like to share today?
I have a guess.
Forgot. You have a, you probably found, you figured out like the first one or two.
You can read this, you are too. Geek.
You got it.
Fair enough. All right, we covered the humor section. All right. With that, we'll call it to a close, this section of the meeting. Actually, I'm going to reshare so I can put my closing screen up. But I want to just thank you guys all for attending. It's been another good one, and special thanks for Aaron to come back and continue the discussion more in depth. So
Yes, thank you very much.
very good.
Yeah,
All right,
thanks.
and stick around for Afterglow if you like.
Thanks, everyone.